crazy to me to think that in just a few days, kids all across Madison County are going to be waking up early in the morning to begin the new school year. Of course, some of you, that begins tomorrow. You go back to school just tomorrow here at EKU or wherever it may be. But there's a lot of kids, I think it's Wednesday, is it, that they'll be waking up and you'll be going to school and then you'll be sending your kids off to school. And it sometimes amazes me that at no time at all, these kids are going to be graduating high school and graduating college, and they're going to be going into their work fields, the work field that they're choosing. These kids waking up Wednesday morning, they're going to represent our future nurses and doctors and surgeons. They're going to represent our future teachers and bankers and blue-collar workers. They're going to represent our future bosses and policemen and soldiers. And someday, though we may not think about it much, or maybe we do think about it, they're going to be our church's deacons and elders, and preachers, and Sunday school teachers, and servants, and lay leaders, and ministers, and so on, and so forth. I say it amazes me, but I also realize, and you all often remind me, that it wasn't that long ago when I was one of those kids who woke up to go to school that morning to begin the first day of the school year. And it was just 5 years ago, believe it or not, this past Friday, that I preached for the very first time here at this church, that I began preaching before you. And as a young minister, I've received several times throughout my ministry different types of comments. The first comment, it kind of makes me chuckle a little bit on the inside, but they always look at me and I'll say, like if I go to a bookstore or something and I tell them I'm a preacher or I'm a minister across town, they always look at me and their question is, okay, so like you're the youth minister, right? Like, is that what you are? Like, no. So children's? No. They never ask worship because I guess you can probably tell by looking at me I wouldn't be a worship pastor. But I always look at them and I say, no, I'm the preaching minister. Like I preach on Sunday morning. Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's cool. The other one is kind of closely related, though, and what they'll say to me a lot of times is they'll come in and it's like they receive this encouragement because I'm a preacher. And so in their words, they'll say this, man, it is so encouraging to see such a young man preaching. You know, I never really thought about it much. I mean, they say it, I just say thank you, and God called me to do this, and so that's why I'm doing it, and just trying to be obedient to Him. But I never really considered what it meant to see a young man preaching. So I decided this week that I would look up some statistics on it. And George Barna is a guy who does a lot of research. Their group does a lot of research on churches and things of that nature. And so according to him, their group, the average age of pastors is getting older. In 1992, the middle ground age was 44 years old. And now we're at 2017. The middle age is 54. So pastors are getting older by the year. And by this point, in 2018, we have more full-time senior pastors who are over the age of 65 than we do under the age of 40. I read these and I began thinking about it, and it almost begged the question for me, and I'm going to ask you, have you ever stopped and considered what the state of the church is going to be like in 10 years? 20 years? Maybe 30? Maybe long after you and I are dead and gone. Have you ever thought about it? You see, we look at numbers like this, that churches are pastors getting older and fewer are coming up. And we look at numbers like this and possibly even just the decreased interest in church altogether in general. And I think we have a tendency that we see it and we kind of just start complaining about it. I mean, we dwell in this mentality that the world is kind of crumbling fast, and we start talking about how, Jesus has to be coming soon because the world just keeps getting worse and worse. And oftentimes when this mentality starts taking hold, we sort of just sit in it because we buy into this thought that there's nothing we can do about it. So we keep watching the news every night, and we develop this thought of pure pessimism, and we worry, and we mention in our Bible studies with this sense of angst, like the world is just crumbling around us. And then we long for the good old days. Man, if we could just get back to the days of old. But then we continue on with our daily lives and do nothing about it. We just try to make the best of it while the world crumbles around us. It seems to us that this movement of immorality and this movement of ungodliness is almost like a train moving down the tracks. And we think there's nothing that I can possibly do to stop that train. Have you ever felt this way? Or thought these thoughts? And if so, if I told you there's something that we could actually do about it to change the trajectory of a city, of a state, of a nation, or even if I just told you there's something we can do to change the trajectory of this church, would you be willing to do it? Would you be willing to do it? Now, some of you might say, well, yeah. Some of you probably a little hesitant because you're afraid of what I'm going to say is the answer. But I believe there is an answer for us. And that's why today we're beginning a new series. We're beginning a short series actually today that's going to give us the answer of how to do just that. How do we change the trajectory of where the church is going? And the answer is found in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. And while the answer may seem simple in conversation, putting it into practice is going to take some work. And there are going to be days when we're going to be wondering, is it having any effect at all? But we trust that in the long run, it's going to pay off. So the series we're beginning today is called Little or Small Investments, Big Rewards. Go ahead and change the slide. Small Investments, Big Rewards. Apparently I deleted it, I guess. The entire series basically deals with our approach to raising the next generation of the church, raising up our future preachers and teachers and leaders and servants and etc. And while it's a short series, I believe it's an all-important series, and I would even say that it is a necessary series. Because if we truly want to change the direction of the church, if we want to change the present condition of the church, I believe it begins with how we go about raising up the next generation of the church. So I want to begin this morning with Solomon's words to us, and words that you may be familiar with. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's a familiar verse for us. Many of you as parents have likely heard this verse or read this verse and found some hope in it. Maybe you've heard sermons on it. You've heard people teach on it from time to time, or had someone offer it to you as a word of encouragement as a parent. But in a nutshell, I believe it's Solomon's way of telling us that we are responsible to train up the next generation of the church. It's our responsibility to lay the foundation, to establish the groundwork of Christ, to point the next generation in the right direction. And I believe that by doing that, we are making small investments in our children. And I'm not saying they're small and insignificant. They're quite significant, but they seem like small little investments. And as I said, the answer to our original question, how do we change the trajectory, is going to seem simple enough. This verse seems simple. But if you've had kids, if you've had grandkids, or even if you just know a kid, then you know that this verse and the responsibility of it isn't as easy as it might seem. So what does it actually mean? What does Proverbs 22 verse 6 mean? The verse is broken up into two parts. First of all, there's a command, and second, there's a principle. So let's take a closer look at it this morning. First of all, the command. Solomon says this. He says, train up a child in the way he should go. What does it mean to train up a child? The Hebrew word for train up is kanak, and kanak is used just 4 times in the Bible. In all of the places of Scripture where it is used, it deals with dedicating a building for its specific purpose. In fact, it's often in the other 3 verses that it's translated, they'll use the word dedicate or a variant of dedicate. We found this in just if you want to look at it yourselves, 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 63, where Solomon comes in. They built the temple, and he sacrifices like a ton of animals. Actually, it's 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. Like, he just spent a lot that day. But anyways, he comes in and he dedicates all these animals, or sacrifices all these animals to dedicate the temple for its specific purpose. So when we dedicate a building, we're establishing the direction with which the building is going to be used. In 1999, this building was completed. And many of you were here that day when you all came in and you dedicated this building. And so you dedicated this building for the specific use of worshiping God and joining a church together within this building. So we got this idea. Solomon's saying, well, we ought to dedicate our children. We ought to lay the foundation, lay the groundwork toward which they should go. But the word also carries with it this idea, that, or it describes really the palate or the roof of the mouth. So David Jeremiah says concerning this word that in order to stimulate a newborn sucking reflex, Hebrew midwives would put something sweet on their fingers, so like they crush up dates or something, and they swap their finger in it, and they stick it in the infant's mouth, the roof of its mouth, and rub it on there in order to train up their nursing instincts. So Canuck has this idea of stimulating, of encouraging the child to do something that will ultimately be for their benefit. It's training the child up in the way he should go. So David concludes by saying, likewise, a wise parent is one who uses incentives to stimulate or train up his children towards godliness, creating a hunger in the child for righteousness and wise living. Solomon is pointing out the necessity for us as parents, and maybe your children are already grown up, but you are a brother or sister in Christ to me as a parent and to other parents here. So I'm calling you aunts and uncles in the church. It is our responsibility as a family to raise up the next generation in godliness, to train them up in the love and knowledge of God. So how do we train up a child? Just briefly, I'm going to give you two ways. It's going to be the next two sermons in the series. But first of all, we teach them. We teach them through Word. We teach them what the Word of God says. We teach them what it means for our lives and how we are supposed to live in response to it. And second of all, we live it ourselves. This isn't one of those do as I say, not as I do type moments. Any of y'all had parents that said that? Maybe you was a parent that said that. Do as I say, not as I do. This isn't one of those moments, guys. All right, we model it for the next generation. We show them what it means to live the Christian life. Showing them godliness, what it looks like in our day-to-day life. So both in word and in deed, we train up our children. And let's be honest, they need it, don't they? Kids need some training in godliness, don't they? Think about kids for a moment, or maybe think about yourself as a kid. How many of you ever had to teach your kids to do something wrong? Any of you? Not a bit of us, right? I mean, it amazes me. I got a 2-year-old, and so I've watched her grow up, obviously. And so it amazes me how rebellious a 2-year-old, or even younger, can be. And if you serve in the nursery, you've seen how rebellious they can be sometimes. Yeah, no, not at all. You've seen it. I mean, I'm thinking about my child, and so we don't teach them to lie, right? I mean, we don't tell them, hey, you need to don't tell the truth here. All right? But they'll come in, and if they sense like they're going to get some kind of punishment, they immediately lie, don't they? It wasn't me that did it. Like it was some other kid. It's a figment of my imagination. I'll tell you a story. My nephew, he's about 3 or 4 years old, and so we had the rule like everybody else. You don't play with a ball in the house, right? Y'all had that rule when he's growing up, or maybe you had it for your kids. So my nephew had this little ball, and it was like a dodgeball type ball. And he was playing with it, and he's bouncing, and he's throwing it in the air, and was like, Derek, you don't need to be doing that. And I'm like, dude, you're about to get it because you're about to do something bad. And I was 10 years old at the time. And so Derek's playing with this ball, and like he throws it up, and he hit the ceiling fan. And so when he hit the ceiling fan, he actually hit the light, and so the light went crooked, and the light busted, obviously, at the moment, and went out. And so my sister's like, oh, you're in for it now, Derek. And he's freaking out, right? I mean, because he's like 3 years old. He thinks, man, I'm about to get my hide tanned. And so my sister said, when Pa Johnny gets home, you have to tell him you're the one that did it. Derek's like, he's bawling at this point. He's freaking out. And Pa Johnny is my dad, so it's his grandpa. But so Dad gets home, and we're all sitting there on the couch. Derek's in there with us, and you can tell he's a frantic mess. And so my sister's sitting there, and again, Sarah told him, hey, you have to tell him that you're the one who did it. And so Dad goes in. Dad tries turning on the light. The light doesn't come on. He thinks, you know what? Something's happened. They've turned off the little switch. So he walks over here, and he pulls down a little switch several times, and it doesn't do anything. And he looks up, and he sees that the light is broken. And he said, who did it? And without missing a beat, my 3-year-old nephew goes, Sarah did it. I mean, just immediately. Which she freaked out, obviously. She's like, you liar. Like, you know. So when we don't have to teach them, we never taught him how to lie. He just got scared to death and said, hey, she's the one who did it, even though knowing good and well he was the one who did it. We don't have to teach them how to lie, do we? I mean, we don't have to teach them to throw tantrums, do we? I mean, how many of you have taught your kids how to throw a tantrum? Yeah, when they seem like they're not getting in their way, legs go kicking, arms go flailing, tears go flying, right? Or maybe, how many of you taught your kids how to throw food at the table? Yeah, none of us taught our kids how to throw food at the table, but if they get to the point where like we don't want this food anymore, there it goes. Or maybe we're upset that we even have to sit at the table. There it goes, and the kids start throwing their food. I mean, they're trying to start a food fight right there in the back of the church. Y'all seen my kid back here before. I mean, that's what kids do. I'm going to ask you this way. Is it your kids the same, or is it just my PK that acts that way? For those of you who don't know what a PK, pastor's kid. But anyway. So everybody else, good. I'm worried about me raising my child here for a second. Kids need training. Need training. And if we don't train them up, then kids are going to train themselves. And that is no good. That is a scary thought. Because if you have your Bible still open to Proverbs 22, you can just drop down about 9 verses to Proverbs 22:15. And Solomon says, folly is bound up in the heart of a child. So Solomon is telling us that if we don't train up our children in the way of godliness, they're going to wander off in the way of folly. The lying won't stop. The tantrums may seem a little more subtle, but they'll continue. And the disrespect and the sinful ways will only increase. Solomon says we must be diligent in training our children in godliness. We must be diligent and intentional in training them up, training up the next generation. And here's why this is important. Solomon continues here. He says, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So first of all, we have the command. Now we have the principle. If we do part A, train up a child, then part B will likely occur. Now, some people have used this to try to guilt parents, like if their kids kind of went on a wayward way and kind of walked away from the faith or whatever. Some people have used this to guilt parents to say, like, you didn't do a good job on part A, and so that's why part B didn't come into effect. I'm going to tell you this morning that if you've heard that interpretation, it is completely wrong. Okay? This is not a promise, this is a principle. Proverbs 22:6 is a principle. So it doesn't always work out this way, but generally speaking, when we train up a child, they'll not depart from it. It's generally the case. So we make small investments in our children, and the big reward that we hope for is that when they are old, they'll not depart from it. And we have the idea that the more small investments we make in our children, the more times that we try to invest in them, that we try to teach them, to model it for them, that the general idea is, generally speaking, that the bigger reward we'll see in the end. So we do our best to raise up our children in godliness, laying the foundation upon which our children will build their lives. And let me tell you, folks, we can't be lax about this at all. Because if we are passive in this, if we just kind of put it off, we just hope that someone else will, that like the people in the back, the teachers in the back will do it all. If we're hoping that that's where they're going to get their godliness, I'm here to tell you that we're going to raise a generation who's going to be shaky in their faith and will ultimately crumble when the waves of the world come crashing in. This past year, I was able to be what's called a watchdog at Daniel Boone. I know what your kids are learning at school. I'm not talking about just in the classroom. I've heard conversations at cafeteria tables. It's amazing what like a 3rd and 4th grade kid will know these days. So if you're expecting like Shasta in the back or Carrie on a Wednesday night or whoever it is to teach your child godliness, 2 hours isn't going to cut it. Because they're spending 7 to 8 hours a day learning everything but godliness. And if we don't get in on this, if we don't jump in and take care of it, we're going to raise a generation who doesn't know the Lord. George Varner's research, which we will look at here in just a bit, attempts to sound this alarm for all parents and pastors and leaders and teachers. And it said if we do not take this seriously, we are likely to raise a generation of kids who do not know God. And we may say to ourselves, well, that's never going to happen. Like, we're not going to raise a generation who doesn't know God. But check out Judges chapter 2 with me. Okay? We won't read all of it, but Judges chapter 2, go back and read verses 6 through 9, basically explains that God's people served the Lord all the days of Joshua. So you remember we went through that Joshua series last year, And they went through and they took over the promised land. And so Joshua's generation remained faithful and they stayed true to God. And so Joshua and the elders who outlived him, they had seen the great work that God had done for Israel. They knew God and they continued serving God until they passed away. And we might imagine that the next generation, like Joshua's kids and the elders' kids in this moment, we might imagine that because they were so close to the conquest, they were so close to seeing what God had done for them, that when they got to they're the elders of their generation, and we got to them, we might imagine that they're going to be true to God. Like they're going to know, they're going to be faithful to God because they've seen everything that God could do. But here's what we find in Judges 2, verse 10. And all that generation, that is Joshua's generation, also were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. There arose a generation who did not know the Lord or the work he had done for Israel. Judges 2:10, in my opinion, is one of the saddest verses in all of Scripture. An entire generation didn't know the work of the Lord or the Lord at all. Now the word for know here implies knowledge through experience, and they didn't exactly experience a conquest, like they didn't go to battle themselves, many of them. But how does an entire generation not know the Lord? How does an entire generation at least not know the work that he had done for Israel? It might be that they were raised in the ways of the Lord, like Joshua's generation, and Joshua himself raised them up in godliness. They tried teaching them everything they knew and tried living it for them, but they just decided once they got older, you know what, we're going to go our own ways. Maybe some foreign nations and their gods kind of infiltrated, and so they decided we're going to serve these gods instead of Yahweh. It could be that, but it makes me wonder how intentional the older generation was in raising their children. One person asks it like this, and we'll have it here behind me so you can read it. They asked, were they so busy defeating foreign armies that they forgot to remind their children that it had been the Lord who fought for them? Were they not purposeful about passing those stories on to their children? Did they not encourage their children to encounter God for themselves? Maybe after many hard years of war, the parents dropped their guard completely, dwelling in cities that they had not built, and eating the fruit of vineyards and olive orchards they did not plant. Maybe an entire generation were just too busy. Didn't think they had enough time or felt like they were spent in completely other directions. And so they said, you know what? Don't have time for it. I'm exhausted the way it is. Hopefully they'll attach to the Lord. You see, we don't really know what happened here in Judges 2. But I believe Judges 2:10 sounds off as a warning that we cannot be lax. We cannot be kind of passive or conservative in this whole thing and training up the next generation. Like, we have to hit it hard. This is proof that it's possible to lose an entire generation. And I'm not going to say that we might lose the entire generation like throughout the world. But if we aren't intentional, I believe we could lose an entire generation within this church. Which means that we have to start training up our children this very day, even at a young age. And the statistics will show this to be true. I'm going to have them up here behind me. I want you to consider this for a second. By the time a child is 9 years old, their basic moral foundation has already been formed. By the time they are 13, a person has formed their first basic beliefs about the nature of God, the reliability of the Bible, the existence of an afterlife, and the everlasting love of Jesus. In other words, what you believe at 13, what you have formed at that age, is basically what you're going to believe when you die. 13 years old. Children between 5 and 13 have a 32% probability of accepting Christ. It drops to 28% for those who are between 14 and 18. And those older than 18 have just a 6% probability of accepting Christ. 6% actually. When you go to college, 6%. Also, 63% of Christians became Christians between the ages of 4 and 14. Where are we focusing our church? What generation are we focusing on? Many have concluded from the research that there's a 4 to 14 window. And they say if you don't reach kids between the age of 4 and 14, you've lost them. Where are we focused? Where are we focused? Do you see the reason that we have to be intentional with reaching the next generation? I mean, we have quite the responsibility to train up the next generation in the church. And with the growing influence the world has on our children, the more we have to work to reach them for Christ. So I think that's why C.S. Lewis once said this: children are not a distraction from the more important work. They are the more important work. They're not a distraction from everything we're trying to do in church. We don't just need to shove them off to the side and say, y'all go over here and color and do all this. They are the most important work we can be doing in the church. I'll tell you this morning that the leaders here at Community Christian Church see how important this is. That's why we are partnering again with Daniel Boone Elementary this year. And we ask that you join us in serving this local school to reach the next generation. That service starts just tomorrow, actually, from 5:30 to 7:30. We're going to be there, and they're going to have a few things for us to do, but we're just going to be there to love on children, to show them that God loves them and that we love them and we have a place for them. If you can't be there tomorrow, guess what? There's going to be plenty more opportunities for you to go in and serve. And men, they need you as well. I mentioned being a watchdog. They need you to go in and just sit with students throughout the day, just love on students. And let me tell you something. I've been there for a year. It makes a difference. Definitely makes a difference. But we also, the leaders here, also see the necessity within this church itself. So we are looking for ways to improve our children's ministry here at the church so we can better train up the next generation, for ways that we can better reach that 4 to 14 window of students. But to do all this, it's going to be an all-hands-on-deck type deal. It's going to take everybody. It's going to take men. And men, I'm going to stop here just for a second, okay? Many of you are hearing this sermon and saying, honey, that's a good thing for you to do. We laugh because we know it's true. Any of you take a look at the kids that walked back there this morning? How many boys did you see? And maybe some of them aren't here today. How many boys have you seen in our youth group, in our children's ministry? Men, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be there with these boys. These boys need a role model. They don't need just mommy or just one of their aunts here in the church. They need us men to step up and say, I'm going to lead you. I'm going to teach you. This isn't a children's ministry, isn't just for the women. Equally, or maybe even more important in today's society, that men step in as well. So whether you're male or female, whether you're young or you're blessed with many years or you're anywhere in between, we need you. And we need you to step up. This morning we passed out, actually I'll get to that in a second. I want to quote to you what Gary Hopkins says. He's a renowned Christian researcher on youth and at-risk behaviors, and this is why it takes everybody, and this is what he says. He says the entire faith community should be a vital agent in the spiritual growth of youth. The entire faith community, again, not just women, not just a certain generation of the women, everybody across the board. He says it takes a church to build and nurture faith in young people. It takes the faith community to show children and young people that the church cares about them. If church members take time to know the children and teens personally, eat and play with them, pray for and with them when they have difficulty, encourage them when they are discouraged, forgive them when they err, and support and counsel them, they are less likely to be involved in at-risk behaviors and more likely to stay with the church and with God. You know what he's saying? Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he'll not depart from it. He concludes by saying, yes, we are called to partner with parents in helping our children grow closer to Jesus. So this morning we are asking you to help us. This morning, again, we passed out these sheets of paper, and you can go ahead and pull them up now and look at them. But basically, they're just interest survey sheets to see who wants to volunteer for a children's ministry. And let me tell you, it goes through there, and you can answer the questions. There are numerous ways for you to serve. And I know we have some great teachers, Marshall and Shasta back there in the back right now. But let me tell you, they need more than just Marshall and Shasta in the back. They need more people to help. Sometimes Marshall and Shasta need to sit in here on a service and listen to what God's saying to them so they can be built up to go further, pour in to the children. So there are plenty of ways for you to serve. Maybe you feel comfortable in being a servant as a teacher. Maybe you just want to be a teacher's assistant where you can just go in there and love on kids, kind of model godliness for them. You can go put Band-Aids on boo-boos and help pass out the papers and items that they'll need for the class. You can pick the age group. If you look at the sheet, you can look at the age group. You can pick out which age group you're more comfortable with, how often you're able to serve. And if you're not comfortable preparing your own lessons, guess what? We will prepare one for you. You say, I don't know how to put a lesson together. We have people who will put a lesson together for you. And if you say, I don't feel capable of doing it, but I'm eager to help, we'll offer training. We'll bring you in. We can go through training to help you figure out how to better teach and better serve and assist with our children. So we ask that each one of you fill out one of these today. And again, maybe not a teacher's assistant or a teacher, but you have, like, God's given you a special talent, a gift, and you just want to share that with them, maybe in a Sunday morning service or at a special ministry event. Whatever it is, we ask that you fill those out. We have little boxes or little crates at both doors. We ask that you fill those out and put those in the boxes on your way out. There are plenty of places for us to make small investments in the world. Let me ask you, what better place can we put our investments than in our children? And I don't know how you feel, but the statistics, when I read them, were truly alarming to me. Eye-opening. And we are responsible for training up the next generation in the church. So if you're unsettled with where a church or where a society is now, then we must take action. And training up the next generation is the action we need to take. It's not something we can do a little bit later from now. It's not something we need to put off. It's something we need to do today. Because in 5 or 10 years, it may be too late. So join us this morning at Community Christian Church as we seek to train up the next generation in Christ, so that what took place in Judges 2:10 will never happen again. For as Solomon said, train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he'll not depart from it.